HR issues can kill you. One complaint against your company can turn your world upside down. And you spend way too much time dealing with HR when you should be spending your time on making a profit. You should talk to Bambi. With Bambi, get access to your own dedicated US-based HR manager starting at just $99 per month. They get to know you and your business while providing HR expertise and the personal touch you need and want. They're available by phone, email, and real-time chat, so onboarding and terminations run smoothly. Team members reach peak performance, and your business stays compliant with changing HR regulations. And with Bambi's HR Autopilot, you'll automate important HR practices like setting policies, training, and feedback. HR managers can easily cost $80,000 a year, but Bambi starts at $99 per month. Schedule your free conversation today to see how much Bambi can take off your plate. Go to Bambi.com right now and type in Accelerate under podcast when you sign up. It'll really help the show. Spelled BAM, BEE.com. Bambi.com. Type in Accelerate.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth with your host, Diane Helbig. Diane is a leading small business development and leadership coach, author, and speaker who is passionate about sharing valuable ideas, tips, and techniques with business professionals worldwide. Diane brings you the world's experts and gurus in all things business. Whether it's sales, structure, social media, planning, or plateauing, guests bring their expertise and energy to each episode. When growing your business is your focus, Accelerate Your Business Growth is the show to listen to. Got a topic or guest suggestion? Let Diane know. The goal is to make sure you have the information you need to move your business forward. Thanks for joining us. Settle in and enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. Today's podcast is sponsored by Audible.com. Head on over to audibletrial.com/businessgrowth. Sign up for a free trial of Audible.com and explore not only the audiobooks, but the other content they have as well. Over the years, the Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast has gained recognition as a great resource for small business owners, sales professionals, entrepreneurs, business leaders, and that's because of the guests. These are folks who have expertise in particular areas of business, and they join me for a conversation where they share that expertise with all of you. Today is no different. My guest today is Benjamin Marcovitz. Ben is a champion for growth, a leadership expert, and the founder and CEO of the Rise Institute, which advances the understanding that human beings can grow and develop beyond their estimations, and that expecting radical growth from those who struggle can and should be the norm. Using his expertise in consulting work, background in education, and boots-on-the-ground research on human behavior, Ben helps leaders accelerate their work and generate breakthrough performance in their employees. He believes the world will be transformed if people understand and recognize the possibilities for growth within everyone. I just love that. Thanks so much for joining me today, Ben.
Thank you for having me, Diane. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So I am curious if you would share with the listeners some of the things that you learned when you were working in education that have actually transferred over to business.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I think it's just a really important thing when you're teaching kids in a school to feel that you are their leader. And the distinction of being a leader of kids in a school is that you take full responsibility for their performance. And so when, as is often the case, kids do not grow as fast as you want, there's never any doubt that that responsibility is yours.
Mm.
And as I moved into being a leader of teachers, I recognized that that was just as important a relationship to have between me and them as their adult leader. And as I discovered branching out into other fields, that that was a mindset that was, I think, unfortunately, not common. So the approach to folks who don't perform well in the typical organization is to assume that that's their responsibility, not their leader's responsibility. And that's okay if you can move them out and replace them rather quickly. But I do think there are missed opportunities for growth that I actually think many effective teachers know that many effective leaders of adults don't.
That's really interesting. So, gosh, that sounds to me like, um, is it part of what teachers are taught, as far as how to manage a classroom and how to get the most out of kids and that sort of
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah, I think it's the good teachers know this, whether they're taught
Okay.
it or not.
Huh.
If you have teachers who are actually measuring their results, looking to improve the learning in their classroom, if you look across those who really do an exceptional job, they all share this one characteristic of how they culturally build their classroom. And this is something that I think most leaders should pay attention to if they're looking to create a really accelerated business model. And it's something that I've, over time nicknamed the growth cycle, which is a developmental idea, very common in effective classrooms, less common among leaders of bigger organizations, that anybody can really use to help everybody do a better job, and particularly those who we think just can't improve. And it holds that underperformers typically need their identities elevated before their performance improves. So thinking about from a student perspective, if you are a child who gets D's, you often think you're a D student.
Hmm.
And we usually respond to that by saying, well, here's what you need to do to get an A. Sometimes that works, but I think rarely, because usually that student is in a vicious cycle. I get D's and therefore I'm a D student. I keep getting D's and so on. The growth cycle asks us to change that statement to, I get D's, but I'm actually an A student, which creates more curiosity and motivation and confidence and planning. So the vicious cycle can actually become a virtuous one when we as leaders make that happen. When a teacher says, you're an A student, we both know that. Let's see how we can start showing that here. And then noting incremental progress. And so this idea that growth doesn't just rely on improving performance, it relies on our excitement to improve, which we see most often as an identity responding to our performance. I do well in sales, and therefore I think of myself as a strong salesperson. And probably because of that, I set a high bar for myself and continue to improve my sales. And the way we lead tends to assume that's the way it works. We perform well, so then our identity as a performer drives us to improve even more, and that makes sense. But the easiest growth happens that way. And the growth that is really hard, the growth that you see your underperformers need to make in order to actually show up well at work, actually works in reverse, where we try to improve that identity before we even expect the ability or the performance to improve.
Well, so I love this concept, and you sure are right that it's not happening in businesses, because as you were talking, I was thinking about this concept that I've just heard repeatedly, that like in a sales department, the sales manager is better off focusing like on their B players to get them up to A players, and spending time with A players so that they remain A players, than even worrying about the C players. But this flies in the face of that.
Yeah, and if that's an approach you want to take, I see it as successful enough for most folks that they can get by. I think two problems with it. One is that well, you're certainly missing an opportunity for pretty dramatic performance improvement, even among your B players. But also, we see the times changing on this, and turnover rising, steadily upwards of 20% over the past 5 years across all sectors. I have been called a millennial in the past. I think I might be a few years beyond that, but I see it as a huge trend that many folks in the workforce feel entitled to leave their jobs if they're not growing.
Yeah.
And of course, avoiding turnover and growing your own people better, huge cost savings, big competitive advantage. And really, it helps you people proof the roles in your organization. And then, of course, if you have a reputation for really strong people development, you can become a magnet for some of the best talent, win best place to work prizes, et cetera. So I think, there's an organization I worked with fairly recently who was contemplating a pretty large reduction in force, needed to, actually, as many folks have. And the one thing they had to pause over was where to draw the line, right? Where to actually cut off those who are staying and those who were not. And what I asked them to do is break it down to behaviors. So they were to say, the folks we'll be laying off are folks who haven't gone above and beyond in their daily work, beyond their job descriptions to help make this company a success. They're perfectly great, but we'd rather keep those who are going above and beyond. And I said, well, let's say some examples of what going above and beyond means. And they did. And they actually sent out a newsletter before they executed this reduction. And the behaviors of going above and beyond were so clarifying for people that they actually ended up having a much harder time making these cuts because everybody stepped up to this new identity of folks who are going above and beyond, which is just another thing a great teacher does in the classroom, is discover, the most effective kids in the classroom are, say, doing their homework every day or raising their hands and asking questions no matter how nervous they are. And when they call that out to the entire classroom, the kids who are actually least likely to do that start doing it because they want to belong. And when the leader norms the group as having that identity, the sense of belonging depends on living up to those behaviors. And that's when you really start to see performance improvement that you never expected.
Boy, yeah, it's so great. I mean, leadership is so, I think, misunderstood to a great degree in business. And these are such great examples of, for me, of setting the expectation and then having consequences and openly sharing what they are, and then working with people to help them get to that place where they are meeting or exceeding those expectations.
Yeah, it's a fairly familiar psychological experience, I think, for many of us, right? If you imagine how much harder you work on that report when everyone reading it knows you to be a great writer already, or maybe a time you mistakenly overheard someone saying you were terrific at something you thought you were pretty bad at, right? And that actually changed your entire approach to that thing. So this idea that identity improvement can precede performance improvement really relies on how first the leader sets expectations for you, right? Yeah. So if you've got the old way of thinking, you probably remember learning to read, and that memory is probably a little bit like, I read a little bit, I did okay, I was proud of that, so I kept reading, and therefore my performance continued. I had a good identity, I was proud of myself, and I just kept repeating that. But if you were learning to read and struggling, that maybe meant you had an identity as a bad reader. And that has a negative effect, actually lowering expectations, creating a pretty terrible downward spiral. So when leaders assume this is the only approach to development, we tend to have strong folks getting stronger and weaker folks on their way out. And this new way of seeing it is just looking at how development can be just as strong for those who don't perform well. And something that I think of as kind of a more radical growth. And most radical growth happens with the reverse of this. So, there are struggling salespeople everywhere. Every time they try, they feel terrible, and their identity is bruised by that. and they set expectations lower for themselves. But there is probably a great salesperson somewhere right now, maybe even nearby, who started off as a terrible one. And more than likely, a leader decided she could expect better from him, convinced him of something like, look, you're a great salesperson. You just need to start doing X, Y, and Z. And he strove to perform. He wanted to live up to what this leader believed he was. And so once he did, his expectations for himself grew and a virtuous cycle began. And that's the kind of radical growth in underperformers that we can really do. We can base a fair amount of it in research, right? When we see a huge win from a struggling student, or a breakthrough in someone living with a physical disability, or Olympic athletes who set new world records, right? That kind of radical growth, those leaps, they follow a pattern, right? This big elevation expectations, whether that comes from you or the leader, followed by this leap in identity, and then a performance that somehow bursts through to live up to it.
So it's a real mindset shift for the leaders, right? That
Exactly.
they have to look at things very differently.
Yeah, and it's almost can feel tactical until you realize how inspiring it is. I was thinking about, I had this moment with, I have 3 kids, and my 2 youngest are boys. Max is 2 and Ronan is 5. And Ronan is not gentle with Max. He often just treats him like a stuffed animal. Max can enjoy this for a little bit, but often gets really upset. And, we talk so much about Ronan being gentler to Max, and we will give him little lessons on it, like when you want something from Max, how do you ask him for it? Don't just take it. And he typically doesn't do well with this, in the moment where he wants to grab something from Max, he will just take it. And then, one day my wife says to me, before there is even any exchange between Ronan and Max, Ben, Ronan has been so gentle to Max. He's really learning how to be a gentle brother. And then Ronan walks right up to Max, asks him nicely for the toy. Max gives it to him. Somehow, right, when our identity is that we are expected to be a certain way, we find it much easier to do that thing. And I think translating this to a business context, so many folks who are underperforming, the first reaction of their leaders is to be kind of disgusted with them and turn their backs on them. And, that's a moment I know I've experienced. And again, first-year teachers feel that all the time with kids.
Yeah.
It's their job to reverse that. And so the leader who understands they have that opportunity in front of them can actually get a whole lot of gains where a lot of folks aren't.
Okay, so I'm curious about the employee who for so long has had such a negative opinion of their ability and whatever it is that they do, that even with positive feedback, they struggle to move the needle. So that feels like, based on this conversation, that there's something different the leader could be doing,
right,
to help them.
Yep.
Outside of, just giving them positive affirmations. So
yep.
What would that be?
Yeah. So if I think about, clients of mine who've had that experience, and it's universal, right? And often the case that you've got one of those right now at all times, right? There's somebody like that. And so it's fairly easy to have people talk about it. And almost always when they're talking about it, it becomes clear that there is a kind of personal distaste that comes across. And so if I say, tell me about your lowest performer right now, somebody will start describing how they're making mistakes and so on, but immediately a kind of anger or contempt comes into their tone. And that's when you can recognize something that you would always have to tell a teacher to put away, right? You'd have to actually say, this contempt, this emotional distance that you're creating, it's reasonable, right? This person is underperforming your expectations. It's reasonable. But it does mean that you are probably creating this vicious cycle where that person believes not just that they're doing a bad job, but they believe that you don't think they will ever do a good job.
Mm.
And therefore, the entire incentive structure around your favor or your approval or finally getting to rise up to your level or meet your expectations seems completely impossible for that person. So you actually said something really important, which is no matter how much you sort of compliment them or recognize them, I actually think that's a moment where a very specific type of recognition or compliment could play an enormous role. Um, so if I think about, let's say, a media streaming site that I was working with, where the boss had one of these folks and certainly felt like this person could never improve. And when I said, let's find the one thing they're doing successfully all the time, that person said, well, she always shows up to shoots on time. So whenever we're shooting at a site, she shows up on time, and not everybody does that. I said, great, explain that to her and explain why that's important. So she does. She goes to her and says, I just want to say to you, totally out of blue, by the way, that you show up on time to all these shoots, and it really helps us stay on schedule. It also allows me to tell other people who are farther behind that it's not impossible to show up on time. So thank you for giving me that. And the relationship between these two individuals, as you might guess, completely transforms, right? Because this person who was struggling wasn't just struggling because they had skill deficits. They were struggling because they believed their boss never saw anything positive in them at all. Yet now that was just proved, right? Now it's, oh, it is possible to win this person's approval. It is possible to do well at this job. This is a place that will tell me if I'm doing a good job. So let me try and do more of that. And it's not that that has a dramatic linear effect, for the next 6 weeks, she improves, doubles her performance every day, but it totally transforms the developmental relationship. So that person now goes to her boss for help. That boss is excited to tell her when she's doing well. And that's pretty much always a recipe for growth.
Interesting.
I'm going to take a quick sponsor break, and then I have some more questions for you. Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast is happy to be sponsored by Audible.com. Audible.com is a leading provider of spoken digital audio entertainment and information. They have thousands of titles to choose from, as well as podcasts, Audible originals, guided meditations, and more. One of my favorite audiobooks is Everyone Deserves a Great Manager by Scott Miller. For me, I love being able to listen to it anywhere and across my devices without losing my place. And I think you will too. So visit audibletrial.com/businessgrowth to explore the variety of audiobooks and programs for yourself.
So it's that old catch people doing something good and tell them.
Yes, with I think an additional part that says, tell them how it affects the progress of the work.
Yeah, that feels huge.
Because one, just builds morale. The other, I think, really builds a culture. And that's what I think was successful about this company that had to do its reduction in force, is that it had not clarified what behaviors dramatically impacted their bottom line or their mission. And as a result, people, when hearing it, wanted to do those behaviors more and more often.
Right.
So one of the most, clarifying things is behavioral clarity. And of course, if you can form an identity around it, that's transformative. And so we see, I think the most effective companies do this as a part of their overall cultural design, right? So if, let's say at your last job, everyone complained nonstop and you got used to that. And the moment anything went wrong, you shot an eye roll to a teammate across the room from you, and she shot it right back. You leave that company, you join a new one, and you're in your first meeting, and the air conditioning shuts off. The projector goes purple. The leader is late. And you look for a new friend, right? Someone else in the room to shoot the eye roll to. But suddenly you don't see one. Everyone seems to leap in to help. The AC and the projector are fixed quickly. When the boss finally does arrive, one of your teammates politely tells them that she's sure she had a good reason for being late, but the tardiness set the wrong tone for the meeting, and particularly for this new person here. The leader agrees, offers no excuses, and promises to not let it happen again. And there's still no eye rolls, and you suddenly realize you'll have to be a very different person at this company than you were at your last company. And that identity shifts your behaviors. We tend to think of moments like that as organic, but I believe actually great leaders can ensure they happen. And particularly so in the early days of a new teammate's tenure or the beginning of a company. The one thing everyone thinks in the first couple of days at a new job is, how do I fit in here?
Right.
I just think leaders need to answer that question more decisively and say, be like our highest performers. They have 3 behaviors that are extremely effective. Here's what they are, and build your new identity around that.
That's really terrific. When you were talking about that, I was thinking, like when I do leadership training, this is one of the things that I talk about, is that you have to give people the why. I call it your I why. That, I need X, Y, and Z, or I could use your help with A, B, and C. And here's why. Like, what is the impact of that? What happens if we succeed? What happens if we don't? Because there's always an outcome, one way or the other. And that people opt on when the ask is tethered to a reason.
Right.
Because it's not arbitrary.
That's right. And I think we tend to give people feedback with the goal of either correcting underperformance or something cultural, like changing commitment or changing happiness on the job. And we end up using praise, I think, to make people feel good, not necessarily feel connected to their why.
Yeah.
And so we hope in some abstract way that making them feel good will lead to better outcomes. We say, great job on that meeting, or you're one of our best folks, or I appreciate you. And that all feels good to hear, but it turns out to be a waste of the praise, I think, because the real value of praise is not morale building. It's that praise can radically transform people's performance and change their behaviors permanently. I know for me early on, and you may be seeing signs of this here on this podcast, but I had an airtime problem, and it was a real obstacle for me at work. And I would, talk faster than my mind would think, and I would, use a ton of time in meetings to say very little. And then one day, by chance, I didn't. Right, I got right to the point. I spoke for less than 10 seconds, and the difference was my boss came up to me afterwards and said, when you did that, you got us to the end game much faster, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you in these meetings to begin with. And it was that shift from, now I am the end game guy as opposed to I'm the guy with the airtime problem, that of course made me focus so much more on my airtime problem, because I now had this kind of positive signature that
Right.
that my boss expected from me. And gosh, it took him less than 15 seconds to do that. So how do we build that into our managerial lives, so to speak?
Okay, wait, I have a question for you. Had he ever talked to you about your airtime problem before that?
Constantly.
Oh.
Constantly. Right. And it was what most of us do, like criticism,
Yeah.
And it made me aware of the problem. And indeed, he even made me aware of some solutions, right? So I remember working on thinking through in my head before I had something to say, and just leading with the final point rather than kind of explaining my thoughts leading up to it. All that stuff. I had practiced it. I just didn't get excited about doing it or instinctively gravitate towards it in social situations yet.
Oh.
That feeling like I had to live up to what this group expected of me completely removed those obstacles. I was completely engaged in this new identity. And, that's a huge part of how we feel whole and successful in our lives. And, bosses don't often presume it, and could benefit a lot from working with it and planning it out.
Wow, that is such a great example. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, that is a great example. I love that. Oh my goodness. So what is the new performance paradigm? And I mean, is this, is this what we've been talking about? I'm really curious about
Yeah.
it and, how it helps employees succeed.
Yeah. So I think it's ingesting this growth cycle as your primary understanding, as your primary fuel for talent development, so that
Mm.
you, as a leader, approach hiring, onboarding, and coaching, as well as if you're a founder, approaching your organizational design with the notion that expectations around behaviors are yours to own, and that the more specific you are about those expectations, the more people will build identities around them, the more you don't need to micromanage for them. So, if there were a quick way to execute this paradigm next week, I would probably say to somebody, name the repeatable behavior patterns common to your best performers. So whether that's they find solutions rather than complaining, or they jump into any problem, even if it's not in their job description, and find a way to make those public. Find a way to just post them. Simply say, I listened to a podcast and I heard about this activity and I decided to do it, and here's what I came up with. And then set aside about 20 minutes a week, it doesn't need to be much, to look across everyone you manage. Ask yourself if any of them showed signs of these behaviors this week. And if someone did, write them a 30-second email telling them about when and how that impacted the work. I send these emails sometimes only with typing in the subject line, right? It's that fast.
Wow.
And then, and this step is really crucial, turn the microscope on your most challenged performers and do the same. And even if that's a smaller increment of behavior, a smaller experience, having that person understand that you noticed it means that they're going to be thinking about it, and means that they're going to be focusing on the right behaviors. When they're obsessing, no doubt they already are, over how they're struggling, they can instead obsess over these repeatable behaviors that can actually change them. And I believe you will see pretty extraordinary growth as a result. And then when that starts to excite you, right, there are bigger swings you can take that accelerate results, like redesigning your culture around those behaviors, redesigning your hiring process around those behaviors. And that ultimately, I think, won't just raise performance, it'll make your team extremely attractive to newcomers and extremely fulfilling for the long term.
See, now that's something, it's like a bonus, right? That the way you get more great performers is by having a culture that great performers want to be a part of.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And when it's transparent what that culture is and what high performers here do, then you start to see more of that happen. And what gets recognized gets repeated. And for somebody who knows how highly you think of them, they're not about to lose that status anytime soon.
Right.
So the real question is, for those who assume you don't think highly of them, how do you get them to imagine that very soon they could?
Right.
And what do I have to do to get there is a reasonable question. And so answer it, right? Tell them what the high performers are doing, and really break it down to the repeatable behavioral level, things that everybody can do. Because no doubt your frustration at the end of the day, when you're telling your partner or your consultant about your most struggling performer, says, why can't they just do this simple thing? And the odds are is that you have not explained it simply. You have not let them believe that they can, and that you'll notice when they do. And as soon as you prove all those things wrong, you'll probably see an upward trajectory.
That's so funny. So they can,
right?
They have to know why, and that you are paying attention, and that it matters, and they matter.
Right. And that's just a lesson learned from working in schools, and particularly, we ran schools that were working with kids who are extraordinarily far behind. They would come into ninth grade, sometimes on a third grade level, and catching them up to get ready for college in 4 years was the approach we wanted to take. And so, you throw a million things at the wall when you're trying to make that happen.
Yeah.
And you certainly never ever say, well, let's just terminate the ones who aren't doing as well, or put them into a kind of lower quartile category where they're just going to sit there for a while until they leave. And I say that because that is something that can happen in schools. But we were dead set on not doing that. And when we actually started delivering on those results, we started to see that certainly people grow far more than we expect and predict, and that the ways in which you can help that along are easier than we think. And so
Mm.
building cultures that teach kids that they have the identity of those who grow, we started norming that. So when we start a new class of ninth graders, we know we have to get the equivalent of 3 years of schooling into one. And, in a few years, they compete for college spots with some of the most elite schools in the city, despite being at the lowest end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And, doing that is saying, here, you're joining this place that expects you to be great. By setting foot on this campus, you have decided to be the hardest working kid in the city. And nonstop, we are recognizing what they are doing to live up to that. So really, we'll have teachers from week one walking around with clipboards, writing down every positive behavior they see from every kid and communicating them to families, to the kids directly. Sometimes they'll switch clipboards with each other. So somebody could say, this person told me you did a great job raising your hand. And suddenly you, as a collective of 100 to 200 ninth graders, start saying, oh, wow, I'm successful in this school in a way that I've never been before. I guess I
Wow.
better keep this up. And, while there's certainly moments where we don't succeed every single child in that, the ability to troubleshoot with that in mind, let's start the virtuous cycle somewhere, is always step one. And we found that to be relatively successful. And again, when you need to make that kind of growth, as we did with our students, you start seeing opportunities that other leaders haven't used.
Yeah, boy. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, it's powerful. I think, for me,
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have, I have a story as a parent that led to all of this. And that's just, when my wife and I had our first daughter, Zoe, about 8 years ago, she had a brain injury and doctors told us that she wouldn't develop at all, 0% chance of development. And that experience, of course, devastating over the next couple of weeks. There was a doctor who just happened to say, I wouldn't put it at 0%, I'd maybe put it at 10%. And, that was, of course, a really big moment for us as parents. And the moment for me as an educator, though, was later when I realized, oh, yeah, what I did as a parent there was hear 10% and think 100. Right? There's,
Yeah.
if it's my kid, and certainly if I have resources like I do, many of our families that we serve don't, I'm going to do everything that's possible, everything I can think of to maximize that 10% and turn it into 100. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's how school should be, right? That's what a parent should think is happening when they send their kid to school. These folks are going to assume, regardless of evidence, that my child can grow and learn. And, that is not an approach that we take to everybody we hire,
Yeah.
despite the fact that we have a better chance of doing it because we got to select them ourselves. And so I actually think that the most effective leaders are taking full advantage of that opportunity, even building it into their selection process, and then approaching it like the best teachers of the most disadvantaged kids do, and communicating those behavioral progression points, and also building that culture that sets expectations high before kids even have shown any evidence of which way they'll go. And fundamentally, it's because they see themselves as in control of the weather. They know that they can start a virtuous cycle anytime they want, just like any one of us can end an argument that's going negatively. Any one of us can take a lazy day and turn it into a productive one. We just typically don't. And so I think that's hard to do, but it also is worth recognizing that we can, and that there are some hacks and tools along the way that can help us do it more easily.
Really terrific. I mean, it's just really, it makes so much sense. And the examples are tremendous. It really is how the leader chooses to see things and engage with their students, their kids, their workers, their employees, everything. It
Yeah.
feels like, wow.
Yeah, and that's why creating the Rise Institute made sense to me, because what it turned out was to be a universal concept, right? That this is something that I have thought leaders should use, but it's just as valuable in my life as a parent. It's certainly valuable for people leading adults, but also leading youth development projects. It can be more effective with folks who are much younger. So there's a lot of social service work to do in the youth development nonprofit sector with it. And so what I felt like we needed was an organization that didn't just use this as a fundamental strategy or a talent tool, but used it as its driving force, and its actual mission were to be a progenitor of this idea in multiple organizations. So our goal now is to kind of take some of the consulting at the corporate level that we do and use that both to kind of pressure test a lot of ideas in high stakes environments, but also generate revenue and create a brand that we can help push this along in the social sector, where it's often hard to advance ideas like these. Combining those together has been a long dream of mine, and I'm excited to get started on it.
Boy, no kidding. So speaking of which, how do people find you?
Yeah, I am at benmarcovitz.com, and that's Marcovitz with a C and a V. And probably the initial way to engage is you'll soon find a little growth self-evaluation on there. Helps you see if you're already somebody kind of geared to lead this radical growth. And it'll kind of give you a way to navigate the rest of the resources there to help you, just start implementing right away in the coming days.
Terrific. Wow, Ben, thanks so much for joining me. I cannot even begin to tell you how much I appreciate this conversation.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me. Thanks, Diane.
Wonderful. And listeners, thank you. That this one, boy, such an incredibly great topic. And inspiring. I feel like really positive, which, this year it has been slightly challenging. So this is just really great. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor. Head on over to audibletrial.com/businessgrowth and sign up for your very own free trial of audible.com and check out all of the content that is there. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
Imagine how fast we could solve the world's biggest problems if more SaaS startups would gain traction sooner. Welcome to the Tech Entrepreneur on a Mission podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing experiences from B2B SaaS CEOs who are going above and beyond to deliver change that is noticed. You will hear their secrets and learn what is required to build a SaaS business that the world starts talking about and keeps talking about, and how to overcome the roadblocks to do so.